Good day. My name is Kim Moody, and I'm your host for In the Mood with G C Moody podcast. And today I'm recording this on June the 23rd, 2025. And I thought I'd talk to you about the taxation of signing bonuses from a Canadian tax perspective with respect to professional athletes. There's been a fair amount in the news on this recently, given the high profile nature of John Tavares, one of the star hockey players at the Toronto Maple Leafs. And, for about the last year and change or so, ever since John decided to appeal his reassessment from the Canada Revenue Agency to the Tax Court of Canada, and whenever something like that happens, whenever you appeal it to the Tax Court of Canada, the taxation matter has become public. And so because it's in the public domain, there's been a fair amount of reporting by mainstream media. And so where I get a little frustrated is this topic is surprisingly fairly complicated. And unfortunately, we have, mainstream journalists that are tackling this complex topic. And some are rightfully reaching out to tax specialists to try to understand this better. But unfortunately, I would submit more than many are not. And so what we see in the media is stuff that is just incorrect. And so this podcast, and also a companion piece from the Financial Post that is to be published tomorrow, June the 24th of 2025, and in print on June the 25th of 2025, is an attempt to try to set the record straight a little bit. And so let's take a step back. So John Tavares, superstar NHL player, he got drafted by the New York Islanders and had an amazing career when he was, younger. Became captain of the New York Islanders, and then ultimately got to free agency pursuant to the collective bargaining agreement. And a number of years back, I believe it was 2018, he ended up going to free agency and ended up signing an offer from the Toronto Maple Leafs. And that deal actually is expired now, and as I speak, in literally a week, John Tavares will become an unrestricted free agent, again, free to sign wherever he wants. And so back in 2018, he got the offer from the Toronto Maple Leafs, and there was a whole bunch of interest, as I understand it, from other teams as well. And part of the reason why he signed with the Toronto Maple Leafs, which I'm sure also included personal reasons, he wanted to more than likely play closer to home, and grew up a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, which became rather well known when he signed. There was a famous picture of him in his pajamas in a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey. So, I'm sure there's some sentimental value there. But when it came down to the dollars, there was a significant signing bonus, an inducement to sign, that was part of the contract. And ultimately, this is what the tax case is all about, is the taxation of those inducements, the signing bonuses. And so we'll talk about that. Now, before I move on to just the technical mechanics of how signing bonuses are treated from a Canadian tax perspective, I will say that there's two main things that frustrate me on the reportings. One is that there's just incorrect information that's out there. And two is that, there's no shortage of mouthpieces, especially on social media, that, let it be known that John Tavares was playing tax games and therefore was able to get preferential treatment as a result of this. And the short answer to that, the short rebuttal to that, is bullshit. And I'll explain that in a minute. So let's go back to the first part of my frustration, the incorrect information, which actually was kind of the impetus for this, me finally speaking up and writing about it, and now this podcast. Last week, there was some reporting by a mainstream media newspaper that had picked up a feed from another hockey newspaper that had been reporting that John Tavares won his case. And I thought, what? He won his case? I'm sure I would have heard of that because I'm pretty, I'm pretty interested in this case, just mainly because of the fluidity of it, and I keep up to date aggressively on this stuff. And so I was a little surprised that a mainstream media newspaper got ahead of me, and not to say that it couldn't happen, but they got ahead of me in terms, and the tax profession for that matter, because most of the tax profession is ahead of this stuff. And so I call, call around, and sure enough, Mr. Tavares did not win his case in the least bit. Instead, the Tax Court of Canada came out with an order requiring and compelling the Canada Revenue Agency to disclose certain information, and which it had been withholding from his counsel. And so the judge, or the order, basically compelled him to release that information. And that's really the only thing that happened. And so how the media jumped all over that order and somehow suggested that Mr. Tavares won his case is a mystery to me. It's once again showing that a lot of media, when it comes to hard stuff, which the world is full of hard stuff, just simply gets it wrong. Now, on that point, thankfully, that particular piece that I'm referring to, they did fix their online article probably about 4 or 5 days after, and but the other pieces that are out there have not, and there's a lot of them that chose, I guess, not to do accurate reporting. So that's kind of the first frustration. The second, let's just jump into why Mr. Tavares is not playing games here. All these cases involving signing bonuses, and there's about 10 of them right now that I can tell, based upon the audit report of Mr. Tavares that was released by it's in the public domain as well. There's 8 NHL players, including, and this is public knowledge as well, but Patrick Marleau, future Hall of Famer, all these 10 cases, 8 NHLers and 2 NBA players, were all playing for Canadian sports teams. Most of them appear to be the Toronto Maple Leafs, but not exactly sure, obviously. And certainly in the cases involving Tavares and Patrick Marleau, was the Toronto Maple Leafs. Jake Muzzin is another one that's out there, and he was playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs as well. The Toronto Maple Leafs, in order to induce these athletes to sign contracts, paid signing bonuses. That was part of their contract. So that's the first fact. The second fact is that all of these athletes, including the NBA players, so the 8 NHLers and the 2 NBAers, were non-residents of Canada for tax purposes and taxation residents of the United States. So in Mr. Tavares' case, not surprising, because he had lived in the United States ever since he was a youngster. When he first got drafted into the NHL, he played for the Islanders, and obviously he made his home there and was a non-resident of Canada. And so when he joined the Toronto Maple Leafs, not surprising that he was a non-resident of Canada, because you just don't switch over becoming a resident of Canada on a dime. It takes some time. And so in the year that he became a Toronto Maple Leaf, he was a non-resident of Canada when he received the signing bonus, which was a material amount of money. And so when that happens, when you're a non-resident of Canada, let's just stop for 2 seconds. Canada taxes on a residency basis for individual purposes. And most people listening to this podcast will know that. If you're a resident of Canada, you're taxed on your worldwide income. Pretty straightforward. Now, the Income Tax Act, one would think, has a definition of residency, but it does not. And instead, it leaves the definition of residency to the courts. And there is long-standing court decision, Supreme Court of Canada decision from the 1940s called Thompson, which laid out the parameters of where you're resident, or how you become a resident of Canada. And it's a fascinating decision, but basically it looks at primary ties. Where are you living? Where is your spouse living and your dependents living? Or common law partner for that matter. You don't have to be a spouse, but And where's your center of financial interest? Those are primary ties. Secondary ties are things like club memberships. Where's your health care? Where's your social ties? I think I might have already said that. So things like where's your driver's license? But when they look at where you're living, one of the things they look at is where is there a home available to you? A lot of people get mixed up with this and think that you have to own a home in order to be resident of Canada. No, you don't. If there's a place available to you, let's say your kids own a place and the basement is all yours, or let's say you own a house and you transfer ownership to your kids before you leave Canada, you still probably have a home available to you. So it's a very nuanced question of fact that you have to look at in determining whether or not you're a resident of Canada. And we could talk for well over an hour on what residency means. But in this case, John Tavares was a non-resident, which means that Canada does not tax his worldwide income. And if you're a non-resident of Canada, there's only 3 things that Canada can tax you on. One is employment income exercised in Canada. So if you're an employee and you exercise that income in Canada, Canada has the right to tax. 2 is if you carry on a business in Canada, which in this case, Mr. Tavares did not carry on business. He was an employee. And so number 2 didn't apply. And number 3 is if you dispose of what's referred to as taxable Canadian property, which generally is Canadian real estate or resource property. Well, in this case, Mr. Tavares did not dispose of taxable Canadian property, and therefore 2 and 3 didn't apply. The only thing that applied is, did he exercise his employment in Canada in 2018? And the answer is yes, of course. But did he carry out all of his employment in Canada? No, he didn't, because he played hockey games in the United States. So generally, the way that these athletes get paid, it's pursuant to the regular season for the most part. And yes, there can be some bonuses and what have you, playoff bonuses, but generally your salary is a function of the regular season and a function of the number of games that you play. So in the NHL, 82 games. So if Mr. Tavares played, 41 home games in Canada, in Toronto, and then plus a smattering of other games, like in my hometown of Calgary against the Flames or the Oilers, etc., then that proportion would be taxed in Canada, and there'd be income tax withheld. But not for the games that's played in the United States. But what about the signing bonus? Does Canada have the right to tax that? Well, the Canada-U.S. treaty, which I'm holding up here, if you can see it, but for those that are watching on YouTube, but if you're listening, it's Article 16 of the Canada-U.S. treaty. And specifically, it's paragraph 4 of Article 16. And it says, I'll just read it to you. Notwithstanding the provisions of Article 7, which is business profits, and 15, which is income from employment, an amount paid by a resident of a contracting state, so that would be the Toronto Maple Leafs paying, and they're in Canada, to a resident, John Tavares, of the other contracting state, well, the U.S., so just to put that in perspective, we have the Toronto Maple Leafs who are resident in Canada, who are paying a resident of the United States, and keeping going here, as an inducement to sign an agreement relating to the performance of the services of an athlete, other than amounts referred to in paragraph 1 of Article 15, which doesn't apply, may be taxed in the first mentioned state. Well, the first mentioned state is Canada, but the tax so charged shall not exceed 15% of the gross amount of such payment. All right, in plain English, what does that mean? Well, what it means is that if John Tavares received a signing bonus and he's a resident of the United States and the Toronto Maple Leafs are residents of Canada, then the maximum amount that Canada can charge is 15%. So pretty straightforward. So just using round numbers, these are not the exact numbers, but let's just say it's $10 million that he has as a signing bonus in 2018, or that he had. Well, that means that a maximum of $1.5 million, 15%, would be withheld and paid to Canada. All right. If you stop there, the people that write about this or provide opinions on this think that, not all of them, but some of them think that that's the maximum tax rate that John Tavares paid on his signing bonus. That's incorrect. The United States has a very similar, but a lot more complicated tax system than Canada. They also tax on worldwide income if you're a resident. And in John's case, he was clearly a resident of the United States for tax purposes. So he's taxed on his worldwide income. He's taxed on his employment income for the Toronto Maple Leafs in 2018. He's also taxed on his signing bonus. And so let's say that the total signing bonus and the salary, again, these are not real numbers, I'm just trying to illustrate this, is $15 million. Well, and let's say 5 of that was the salary, 10 million was the signing bonus. I've already explained to you how Canada is going to charge 15% of the signing bonus. And I've also explained to you how Canada is going to tax the remainder employment income, which is 5 million. They're going to withhold tax based upon the days that he exercised his employment in Canada of that 5 million and remit that tax to Canada. So John, when he files his Canadian tax return, is going to ensure that he reports to Canada as a non-resident the number of days and related income that he exercised his employment in Canada on his $5 million of employment income, using my example. Again, these are not real numbers. And on the signing bonus, he's going to report the applicable proportion such that he only pays $1.5 million in tax, so as to comply with the treaty, Article 16, Paragraph 4. But for United States purposes, what do you think happens? Well, in the whole scheme of things, it's actually pretty easy. John reports his worldwide income. And of course, he's got other income, than I'm sure, besides his salary and signing bonus. But he reports the signing bonus of $10 million plus the $5 million in the United States. Is there preferential treatment on the signing bonus in the United States? No, there's not. So he's going to pay U.S. tax based upon the full amount of income that he receives. But because he's going to pay Canadian tax on his employment income and the signing bonus limited to 15%, he will be able to claim that Canadian tax as a foreign tax credit against his ultimate U.S. tax liability. And this is the part of the reportings that gets very frustrating because, again, to reiterate, John is not avoiding any tax. This is simply how much is Canada able to tax on that signing bonus. And pursuant to the treaty, they're only able to tax 15%, but the United States can tax the whole thing, and they do. And so for United States purposes, again, he will claim the Canadian tax that's paid against the ultimate U.S. tax liability, and in our world, we call that a foreign tax credit. So in other words, he'll claim the Canadian tax as a foreign tax credit against his U.S. tax so that there's no double tax. So again, there's no mischief here whatsoever. And if you're keeping up with this, what you'll quickly realize is that, yeah, John's not playing any games here. And the other athletes that are subject to this, they're not playing games. And so really, what is this about? Well, this is a battle between Canada and the United States. Canada obviously wants to tax more of that signing bonus. So what is their argument to get there? Well, their argument to get there, and it's right in the audit report of the John Tavares CRA audit report, which again is publicly available, is that they believe that this signing bonus is not a, in quotations, true signing bonus. And blowing through the smoke, they believe that it's just disguised employment income. And then they use a bunch of case law on both sides of the border to try and support it. I can tell you with experience that their arguments are weak. Now, it doesn't matter what I think, frankly. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the Tax Court of Canada will decide this issue, or ultimately a higher level court, because whoever wins, the other side might appeal it. But I got to tell you, it's very disturbing to me when you see the CRA making an argument that is so weak. I mean, I have no doubt in my mind that players like John Tavares and Patrick Marleau, who were sought after free agents, and they probably had their preferred place to play, but who knows? I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that the inducement offer that was in the contract, the signing bonus offer, was a significant factor to ultimately entice them to sign their contracts. So how the CRA intends to make this argument at trial, I guess we'll see. But it just, on its face, to me, it seems rather weak. And so, again, weak or not, like I said, the court will decide this. But what I find disturbing is that this is a sign of continued attacks by our tax administrator, and frankly, certain laws that have been introduced in the last 10 years, attacking, successful people. Professional athletes no doubt make a lot of money compared to the average, and good on them. They work very, very hard, and there's only a small, tiny group of people that get to that level. And so good on them for being able to do that. And so, when you're caught in a high-profile battle like that, or at least John Tavares and Patrick Marleau, Jake Muzzin, and others, this is more a discussion about policy. Is the 15% limit that Canada has, is that the right cap? Or should it be something higher? Well, obviously Canada doesn't like the fact that they only get 15% of a large signing bonus. And in my view, instead of going after these players with a weak argument that this is not really a signing bonus, it's disguised employment income, this is something that should be brought to the negotiating table the next time the Canada-US treaty is negotiated. I mean, it's been about 15 years or so since the last treaty, protocol. And so, and there's other technical issues in the treaty that likely need to be revisited. Add this to the list. But instead, what we have is Canada Revenue Agency using these players as high-profile pawns in this policy fight. Because let's say Canada wins. Let's say the CRA wins. If they win, will John Tavares have to write a check to Canada? Sure. But will he be able to get that money back in the United States? Well, I'm not his tax advisor, but the short answer should be, as long as there's some protective filings done, which I'm sure he's had done, the answer is yes. So there's no double taxation at risk here. This is a question about who has the right to tax that signing bonus more, the United States or Canada. And so the way that Canada is trying to resolve this is by ignoring the legal agreements. And basically their argument is if Mr. Tavares and others don't perform, then they have to repay some of that signing bonus. And because of that's not a true signing bonus. That's just employment income. Again, sure, that's an argument. Is it a great one? My personal opinion is no, but again, it doesn't matter what my personal opinion is. We'll see what the courts say. But to reiterate, I do find it disappointing that our Canadian tax administrator is using these people as high-profile pawns in a policy fight. And so, again, a couple concluding comments here, just to repeat myself in terms of government attacks on high-income earners. Canada needs to make it attractive for successful people to want to come to Canada, whether you're a hockey player, a technology startup, a high-profile doctor, an entrepreneur, multinational corporation, et cetera, et cetera. We need to make it attractive to come to Canada. We need foreign investment and capital. We're a small country. We need that capital. Cases like this, frankly, have a chilling effect on such attraction. And so I don't like that at all, because, again, we need to make it attractive for people to come to Canada. So I'll close the podcast on this. A famous saying, and I recycle this, and one can debate this, the context of what good old Albert Einstein was doing when he said this, but he did once quip that the hardest thing in the world to understand is the income tax. And, as I say in the closing lines of my Financial Post piece, that's forgivable for physicists and journalists. But it's unacceptable when our own tax authority uses high-profile taxpayers as pawns in a policy fight that they should be taken to the negotiating table and not the courts. And so for the players' sake, I really hope that this distraction goes away soon, because it's unnecessary. And I hope that the magnet gets reversed so that Canada can attract successful people into the future. So with that, I hope you found that interesting. I've been getting a fair amount of questions about what do I think about this whole John Tavares thing. Well, now you know. I don't think it's very good for Canada in the least bit. So, all right. If you like this or like my writings or want more of my writings, go to my website at kimgcmoody.com or like and subscribe to this podcast. And I put out a weekly newsletter, one-to-one-to-one newsletter, one comment on tax, one comment on economics, one comment on leadership. I do that every Wednesday. And so sign up, and if you want regular pieces, and thanks again for your ear. All the best. Bye now.